It had been a strange day at the end of a peculiar week. When Iron Dusty left for work that morning, he felt a tension in the air that he couldn't quite explain. This unease had been building since his wife told him about the party a week ago. He couldn't have explained it if someone had asked. It wasn't even a coherent thought, but he felt unsettled, disquieted, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was just a feeling, and it made him nervous and jittery all day at work. He tried to concentrate, but he didn't want to go to the party. Truth be told, he never liked going to any of his wife's office parties. Those smug lawyers always thought their excrement didn't stink. He thought to himself, you can't skip an office Christmas party, Dusty. It just wouldn't be right. His wife had insisted when he tried to beg off. Of course, he would do what his wife wanted. He always did what his wife wanted. As he shut his computer down to end his week, Dusty looked over at the photo of his two sons taken during a fishing trip last year. He smiled brightly. It seemed his relationship with his boys was the only bright light in his home life in the last few months. Halfway through the drive home, traffic was slowed around an accident in the right-hand lane of the highway. Dusty realized that he was so wrapped up in his own thoughts that he wasn't even aware of exactly where he was on his drive. Due to the accident, Dusty arrived home about 15 minutes later than usual. Instead of what was once a hello kiss when he walked in the door, Dusty knew the only thing he was going to get from his wife was a snide comment. She didn't disappoint. It's not like you couldn't get home on time for once, Tracy griped. Now get changed into your gray pinstripe suit. That's my favorite. Dusty silently shook his head. He was planning to wear his dark blue suit, which he felt was more commanding. The gray suit was nice, but he tended to blend into the background more. He most certainly didn't want to blend into the background around these people. James Fielding, the newest partner in Chicago's highest-profile criminal law firm, was hosting the firm's annual holiday party in his large North Side home. As they entered, Dusty could feel Tracy becoming more and more tense. She was talking rapidly, and her eyes blinked nervously, always a sign that she was feeling stress. As they reached the door to what appeared to be a large entertaining area, Tracy's grip on his arm tightened, and she pulled him to the side, pressing him back against the wall and wrapping him in her arms. "Tracy, what's going on? Is something wrong?" he asked. "No, I just wanted to say what?" he asked. "Listen, Dusty. You know I love you. I always have, and I just want you to remember that whatever happens tonight, it doesn't matter between us. Nothing is ever going to change. I just want you to remember that we're fine. I know you don't like these people, and it may be shocking, but as long as you remember that nothing is going to change between us, you're going to be okay." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Dusty said. "You're right. I don't fit in with all these lawyers and high-powered jerks, but what's different? These events have never been fun for me, but I'll just put up with it like I always have. Just remember we're okay." She stepped back away from him and let him lead her into the room. Fielding was holding court in front of a large bar, which featured a painting of a naked woman lying on a bed. Dusty moved off to the side of the bar to get a white wine for Tracy and a scotch for himself, nodding to Fielding when the two locked eyes for a second. Fielding nodded back and gave Dusty an evil leer. Dusty hated that look. In fact, he wasn't sure he didn't hate Fielding as well. Dusty got the two glasses and moved to intercept Tracy, who was heading for Fielding and his group. Tracy had maneuvered Dusty so his back was to the bar. He stood on the outside of the group. Tracy worked her way over to Fielding, who gave her a polite peck on the cheek before going back to pontificating about something. Standing on the periphery, Dusty really wasn't paying attention to the conversation. He glanced around a bit, catching another quick look at the nude painting, and thought to himself that it was fitting for Fielding to have a nude painting so prominent in the room. When Dusty zoned back into the room, he thought he saw several people looking in his direction. Instinctively, he looked down at his suit to see if he had spilled something on himself or, God forbid, his fly was open. He didn't see any spills, and a subtle check on his fly revealed it was up. Still, the looks continued. Feeling uncomfortable, Dusty turned toward the bar again, glancing at the painting. The painting was incredibly erotic. Dusty thought the raven-haired beauty was lying nude and glassy-eyed on a bed, obviously just having had what appeared to be very satisfying sex. It was a look he knew all too well on a face he knew all too well. The woman in the painting was standing right next to him. Dusty stopped thinking. For that matter, he stopped breathing too. He stood open-mouthed, staring at the painting. He didn't notice Fielding and his wife exchanged smirks. Gradually, others in the room turned toward Dusty, some smirking, others with pity showing on their faces. After what felt like forever but was probably only 10 seconds, Dusty gathered himself and whispered to his wife, "That's you." The room had gone completely silent when Dusty stared at the painting, and his whispered exclamation might as well have been a scream for the volume it carried. "No," Tracy said quietly. "That woman is black-haired, and I have auburn." "Silly." She giggled softly, which only seemed to make her disclaimer even more false. Several people looked from Tracy to the painting and back again, and several more were laughing quietly. Fielding gave Tracy a quick wink. Dusty looked over at his wife, then shifted his gaze back to the painting. In an almost catatonic voice, he said, "Black hair, but auburn pubic hair." "Your pubic hair, Tracy." Tracy looked hard at the painting. Although she had seen the painting before, she hadn't noticed that the painter had left her pubic hair of the actual color, not making the change to black like he had with her hair. She quickly wondered if that had been intentional or was a mistake. Not that it really mattered. Tracy had surmised Dusty would eventually figure out that the painting was of her, but she and Fielding had figured it would be later on in the evening after he had been softened up by a few drinks. Neither had planned on such a quick reveal. Dusty felt two sets of strong hands grab him by the arms and shoulders. He was hustled out of the main room into a smaller one to the side. Fielding and Tracy followed a second later. Fielding practically sneered at the smaller man. "Listen, you little nerd. This is how it's going to be from now on. Your wife is going to be my slave, and you get to keep her in your home life when I'm not using her." Fielding said. "Fight this, and the firm will represent Tracy and take everything you have, and I'll still be screwing her." Dusty looked back and forth between Fielding and his wife. He felt both literally and figuratively trapped. "This has been going on for quite a while now, and you never had a clue," Tracy explained. "So you lost nothing. We're not going to change anything. You and I are going to continue on as we always have, and I will continue to see Jim. Or I will take half of everything we own in a divorce and continue to see Jim. The choice is yours. Most of my coworkers and friends already know. You're just about the only one who doesn't know yet. The boys and your friends, this is just about your ego. I mean, we can continue to be man and wife with all that implies, or why would I want to sleep with you ever again? You're screwing him. You've made it quite clear I'm just an afterthought. I'm not taking sloppy seconds from James Fielding's horror. Feel better now, Dusty? Now that you've gotten to call me names, what's next? You going to accuse me of having cooties? God, he was so right about you. You were just a little man." Fielding's laughter reverberated in the room as Dusty was escorted out of the room and then the house. Dusty heard the laughter as he left. He held his tears in check barely. "Did you see the look on Hub's face when he saw that painting?" Fielding crowed to Tracy. "Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to apologize to him, but when he practically accused me of cheating, I guess I figured I needed to get back at him somehow. The painting was a great idea, Jim. But you were cheating on him at that point." Fielding laughed. Tracy followed Dusty out, figuring she would need to call her husband. In truth, Dusty had questioned his wife several times in the past year when things didn't quite add up, but each time Tracy had gotten on her high horse about her husband not trusting her. That argument had successfully backed down Dusty, who felt bad that he questioned his wife of 27 years. As the two drove home, Dusty reflected back on Tracy's 12-year career with Scott Hansen LLC. After staying home raising the couple's 2 sons until they had gone to school, Tracy decided she wanted to go back to work. At first, she was assigned to Old Man Hansen, the firm's senior partner, but when Hansen retired 3 years previously, he was replaced by 35-year-old Fielding, a 6 feet 4 inches, 220 pounds Hulk who made 47-year-old Tracy nervous by the way he looked at her. She admitted, despite that, she chattered out about her new boss for the first 2 months, then suddenly went radio silent. Dusty knew that Tracy could still turn heads with her long hair and amazing curves. He still thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever met and often wondered how he had gotten lucky enough to land the prize. Not that Dusty was an ugly dweeb. He was only 5 feet 9 inches, but a solid 170. He was quiet by nature and analytical, typical traits most people would associate with accountants, which he, in fact, was. When Dusty found out that Tracy's new boss was alive, large, handsome, and younger, he figured he would try to keep track of his wife's comings and goings. Tracy didn't work late with Fielding any more than she had with the old man, at least until about a year ago. Then the late nights started increasing before a week-long trip to New Orleans with Fielding for some kind of legal symposium. Dusty wasn't happy that Tracy had to make the trip, but he understood that as his admin, there were going to be times that she would have to travel. He still put in his 2 cents with his wife, at which point she loudly accused him of not trusting her despite the two being married for more than 25 years. No longer in the Christmas spirit when he got home, Dusty poured himself a single malt scotch and practically staggered over to his favorite lazy boy. It's not every day when your life turns to in a matter of minutes. He cried like a baby for the next 5 minutes at least. Until this past year, Dusty thought he had the perfect marriage. Then the little cracks seemed to show up. Although at first, he didn't want to see them, then his wife denied that those cracks even existed. Dusty had to admit that aside from working late and the trip to New Orleans, things between the pair had seemed pretty normal. The sex hadn't suddenly ramped up or been cut off. He had noticed, though, that his wife's wardrobe seemed to get younger and sexier, and lately, her attitude toward him had turned sour. Dusty drank several single malts and finally drifted off to sleep in his chair while watching the classic Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Tracy finally woke him at 1:45 a.m. to try to get him to sleep in the couple's bed. "I've got to admit I didn't see that coming, Tracy," Dusty commented dispassionately. Tracy blushed deeply from the look on her face. Dusty realized that she hadn't considered her children when she posed for the portrait. Dusty was barely able to keep himself from lashing out at his wife physically. She would never know that her deceased father-in-law's teaching had probably kept her out of the hospital when he collected himself. Dusty unclenched his fists. Tracy saw the movement and her eyes got wide. A chill of realization came over her that she perhaps pushed her husband to the edge. "Well, since we're being so open and honest, how about answering 2 questions for me?" "Why and for how long?" Dusty asked. Tracy studied the pile of the carpeting for a few seconds while her face changed expressions. "We didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. About a year ago, we found we had a lot in common. You and I had gotten stale. Jim's a take-charge kind of guy, and he kind of took charge of me. I liked it. I liked it a lot. And then when you sort of accused me of cheating, I got mad, and Jim and I came up with a way for me to get even. But you were already cheating. That's not getting even. That's rubbing my face in it." She looked up like she was going to reply, then put her head down silently. "So what you're telling me is that you opted for new, young, and exciting over same old, same old. What we had for all those years didn't mean anything to you." Dusty said. "I still love you, Dusty. I'm just not in love with you anymore. Jim and I connect on so many levels, and it's new and exciting." "Of course, it is. You bimbo. You're a new piece of meat to him, and he's a new stick to you. You haven't gone through the rigors of everyday life with him, raised children with him, come home and done daily chores, and what's with that picture? That painting? You would never have let me take a cell phone photo of you, but you pose naked and well drilled for some painter so Mr. Wonderful can hang you in plain sight in his home and everybody can see what a beautiful you are. Tracy blushed deeply again and started concentrating on her shoes. Dusty kept his eyes on her, and she eventually looked up. It was very exciting being naked in front of another man right after having sex with Jim, knowing that he was recording our lovemaking for everyone. Tracy admitted. Did you screw the painter too? Dusty blurted out. Well, once after my last posing session. Jim and I thought we owed him one after teasing him for most of the week. Of course, fair is fair. Dusty snarked. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Dusty asked, Did you forget about the boys? The boys? What do they have to do with this? Tracy asked back. This has nothing to do with the boys. They are out of the house now and have their own lives. You don't see breaking up our family as having no impact on the boys. You're not going to break up our family. You don't want any more people than necessary knowing you are a Tracy ridiculed. Besides, I know you love me. Give me this for a little while, and after this, it can be me and you again just like always. I overestimated you all these years, Dusty said. First, I thought you loved me as much as I loved you. Second, I thought you were fairly smart. Tracy pulled a face when Dusty finished his last statement, so he figured he should elaborate for her. Tracy, a no-fault divorce does not mean there is no one at fault. It just means the state doesn't want to screw around with trying to find fault and splitting assets. I am not afraid to tell the world that I am a cuckold because you are an unfaithful. What do you think the boys are going to say to that? Tracy stammered and stuttered, finally choking out, You wouldn't. You would ruin my relationship with my boys to get back at me. You scumbag. No, not to ruin your relationship but to accurately tell my side of the story. You witch. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Confident when the confrontation started, Tracy now looked defeated as she whispered, Can't we discuss this further? I'm afraid not, Tracy. You had sex with him in his bed. Now you get to lie in it. Besides, what have I ever done to give you the impression that I would put up with you screwing another guy? Both of the couple's sons were shocked to hear their father's news when he called them the next day. Are you sure, Dad? That doesn't sound anything like Mom, Robbie, the couple's oldest, said when Dusty called him first. She and Love her boy even had a painting done showing her after sex. It was hung above his bar. The two of them and the rest of their staff thought it was great fun. No, that's ridiculous, Robbie shouted over the phone. Mike, 2 years younger, listened quietly to Dusty's whole story before commenting, Wow, Dad, what the hell did you do to piss Mom off? She would never have done something like this without being provoked. Dusty sat silent for a few seconds, trying to figure out exactly how to respond to his disbelieving son. I think I let her down after all these years. He was younger, bigger, more forceful, and basically someone new and different. I'm not buying it. Sorry, Mike said. Believe what you want, Mike. She shat on me, and I'm not going to take that. Tracy was served a week later. She tried to fight it, tried to get the judge to agree to marital counseling. It seemed like the judge was leaning in her favor until Dusty asked her to explain to him about the naked painting of her hanging in James Fielding's home. The judge looked shocked at Dusty's pronouncement. Seriously, he asked. Naked and well satisfied from the looks of things, Your Honor. In another man's house, Mrs. Dustman. Tracy started to answer the judge when her attorney put his hand on her arm to stop her. Better to keep quiet rather than telling the judge you were a smug idiot after cheating on your husband, he whispered to her. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized with everything split 50-50. As the house was sold as part of the settlement, Tracy moved in with her lover while Dusty moved into a small apartment near his place of employment. James Fielding had just finished pouring himself a single malt at his bar when he glanced at the painting of his lover, Tracy Dustman. He remembered how much fun it was to have Tracy pose for that painting after the pair had sexed several times, with her face showing how freshly drilled and satisfied she was. Her husband was starting to catch on to the fact that she was having an affair, and the two lovers decided to beat him to the punch and rub his face in the affair. Both were sure that her quiet, assuming husband would buckle to the new arrangement, but if not, Tracy would take half of Dusty's assets, and Jim would continue to enjoy her body. The divorce was a little over a year ago, but lately, things between Tracy and Fielding had seemed strained. She seemed to be getting clingier, although Jim had always made it clear to her that marriage was not on the table. A little more than a year and a half into their relationship, Tracy had noted that the heat of her affair had cooled along with the actual sex. At least with Dusty, she could count on 27 years of loving affection, little touches, little caresses. She began to understand that the only thing love and lust have in common is the first letter of both words. 6 months later, Tracy moved into her own small apartment after she and Jim Fielding called it quits. 1 week after that, she was reassigned to be the admin for one of the newer attorneys. She knew the reassignment was coming, but the money and benefits stayed the same, so she actually welcomed the change. Her new direct boss was a handsome young graduate of Georgetown Law School with the attitude of a hotshot attorney on the way up. Tracy thought she wondered to herself if the attitude came with the jurisprudence degree. It took all of 2 weeks before Mr. Hotshot put his lips gently to Tracy's. She promised herself she wouldn't allow him to get to her, but she apparently lied to herself. 6 weeks after beginning work for the new guy, 52-year-old Tracy had her ankles over the 31-year-old lawyer's shoulders as he pounded her in his bed. "Did I tell you that 304 was a hell of a good one?" Fielding asked the young attorney a couple of weeks later. "That painting over your bar was just a tease. She is awfully good." Mr. Hotshot agreed. "Got rid of that painting," Fielding said. "Donated it to a fancy-ass strip club about an hour from here for $5,000 cash. I will write off the full $155,000 purchase price on my taxes." The two lawyers laughed conspiratorially. The Playpen was not normally the kind of place Dusty would have found himself on Friday night, but when Jerry Quack, his oldest son's best man, had planned a bachelor party, he figured he needed to invite Dusty out of respect. He figured the older man would stay for the obligatory length of time, then head out before things got going heavily. The party of 15 arrived at the high-end club in Massachusetts after being checked at the door for proper identification. They headed down a corridor before turning into the main part of the club. It was on the wall right before they stepped into the open main room. Jerry, acting as host for the evening, spotted it first. "Oh hell, look at that. That might be the hottest painting I've ever seen in my life," yelled Willie, another of Robbie's groomsmen. "Holy, it can't be," Jerry yelled, pulling up short after reading the name tag attached to the photo. Jerry went silent, but Willie, not even thinking about what he was looking at, read the tag out loud for the whole group to hear. "Thou shalt not covet," Willie yelled. "Tracy Dustman is painted by Emile Gure." "Hey, Robbie, she's got the same name." Realizing what he was reading, Willie went silent. The others in the group pushed forward to see what the card said. Robbie's face went white as he read the card and looked at the painting. He immediately turned around and looked at his father, then at his younger brother. Dusty shrugged as Mike's face turned crimson. "Been there, seen that," Dusty said to both boys as he kept on walking. The sons looked at each other. They and the rest of the party gathered at 3 tables on one side of the stage. Everybody was waiting on Dusty to explain. "This is how your mother and her scum-sucking attorney lover broke the news to me that she was cheating on me." This was mounted on the wall behind his bar at his house. It didn't have a card on it, but I knew immediately what and who I was looking at. They had the painter color her hair black to be cute, but I knew who that was right away. It was at a Christmas party at his home, and apparently, everybody at the law firm knew they had been screwing and had seen the painting. Your mother and her scum sucker both thought my finding out was hysterical. I don't know. Dad, you've got to get them to take that down. That's Mom, Mike pleaded with his father. I'll go talk to the manager, but you didn't seem too concerned with what she was doing when I first told you several years ago. I seem to recall you wondering what I did to make her mad at me. Mike looked sheepish as most of the group looked at him accusingly. Please, Dad, do something, he urged. Dusty seemed to be the calmest person in the group. He quietly got up, went to the bar, and asked to speak to the manager. There was a lot of gesticulating and some raised voices before Dusty came back to the group, which was mostly sitting quietly as opposed to what most groups like that do at a strip club. The manager says the owner bought the painting from a private individual, and it has been a popular addition to the club. If I want it down, I can buy it for 10 grand. Dusty said. I told him I had no inclination to spend 10 grand on an erotic painting of my cheating ex-wife. Dad, both Robbie and Mike wailed. The evening's activities were over at that point. Both of Dusty's sons headed straight to their mother's apartment when they got back to Chicago. Dusty went back to his own apartment and slept like a baby. Tracy looked like hell as she sat down in the groom's parents' row a few minutes before the wedding was to start. Dusty thought she guessed her spending several hours explaining an erotic nude postcoital painting on a strip club wall to his sons was tougher than he thought. Last night wasn't too awkward, Dusty said sarcastically to his ex-wife as she sat down a few feet away from him in the church pew. Did you know Scum Sucker sold that painting? Not until last night, I didn't, she answered as she blushed furiously. The former spouses had spent hardly any time in each other's presence since the divorce 5 years earlier. Dusty had to admit that Tracy still looked good aside from the red cried-out eyes. After the ceremony and the mother-son dance, Tracy was a popular dance partner at the reception, particularly with Robbie's friends. After talking to Robbie and Mike the night before, she knew the reason why and was prepared when several of the 20-somethings tried to pull her in too close or let their hands wander. There was a time when you would have put a stop to this pretty quickly, she said to Dusty when she came back to the table after having danced with her fifth handsy partner. There was a time when you were my wife and my concern, Dusty said quietly. Then you became somebody else's concern. Now I guess the concern is yours alone, but from what I remember in the Row Mill, says you like them young. Just try to be somewhat discreet tonight for the boys' sake. Tracy's face showed her irritation, but nothing came out of her mouth. She knew that almost all of her sexual liaisons since her divorce were with men closer to the ages of her sons than her own age. She just didn't know how her ex-husband knew this as well. When she wasn't dancing and was sitting at the table with Dusty and several other family members, Tracy couldn't help but watch her ex-husband out of the corner of her eye. She noted that the past 5 years had been good to him. With the only noticeable changes being a few lines on his face and the grin of about half of his hair, his blue eyes remained as piercing as always, and the line of his jaw was every bit as striking as it was when the pair first met a lifetime ago. God, I left this man for what? A little more sex, a little more aggressive sex. ARF, what an idiot, Tracy thought to herself. Yeah, sis, you blew it big time, said Tracy's sister in her ear, causing Tracy to break from her reverie. Tell me I just didn't say that out loud, she said to Hannah, her sister. Hannah giggled before replying quietly, no, but the looks you've been giving Dusty haven't been too subtle. You might as well just ask him to screw you silly while we're all sitting here. Actually, not screw me silly. Just to make slow, passionate love to me like we used to do, then cuddle together after. Nobody has done that to me since we split. Maybe if you asked him nicely, Hannah said after all. It is Dusty, the nicest guy in the world. If he still loves you half as much as he used to, if asked, the nicest guy in the world would have admitted to still loving his ex-wife at least to some extent. He was also smart enough to know, though, that he would never trust Tracy again nor would he be able to recover from her betrayal with Fielding. Dusty didn't even attempt to date for the first year after his divorce, although there were several women in his workplace who made it known they would welcome his advances once they found out he was a single man in the next few years. He came to find out that single women significantly outnumbered single men in his age range. Finding dates was not a problem. Getting over his trust issues was the problem. Dusty did, in fact, wake up in his apartment the morning after the wedding with a beautiful blonde, Kristen Alfred, Anna of Robbie's bride was sitting at the Alfred family table watching various young men dancing and groping the groom's mother. She kept looking back and forth between the dancing and Dusty's reaction to it, or rather his lack of reaction. She and virtually everyone else at the wedding had heard the tale of Robbie's parents, and she was trying to gauge the continuing level of love Robbie's handsome father had for his ex. Discerning that Dusty wasn't carrying a torch for his ex, Kristen made her way over to the Dustman's family table and asked the Dustman patriarch if he wanted to dance. Upon looking at her, Dusty was greeted with the sight of a 5 feet 2 inches blonde beauty with long legs wearing a dark blue dress that ended mid-thigh and looked to be tailored to her every curve. When he saw that she had no rings on her left hand, he smiled and got out of his chair. Thanks to Tracy's love of dancing, Dusty had taken lessons early in their marriage and was quite adept on the floor. The pair cut a dashing figure. They even got in some talking during the slow songs as Aunt Kristen snuggled in close. Dusty didn't spend too much time at the groom's family table after that. When he and Kristen weren't dancing, they were seated together at the bride's family table, and their eyes seemed to be only for each other. He found out that the 52-year-old Kristen taught high school about an hour away from Chicago and had been divorced for 20 years from an abusive husband. If you don't mind me asking, how does a beautiful woman like yourself stay on the market for 20 years? Dusty asked. Major trust issues for one, plus I don't just jump into bed with any man, she answered matter-of-factly. Good answer, said a smiling Dusty. Dusty and Kristen started working on their trust issues together when they woke up the next day. About a year later, they were a second wedding nodding the Dustman and Alfred families. Robbie stood up as best man for his father. Internal Revenue Service Special Agent Michael Dustman made sure that James Fielding was audited 12 years in a row, costing the attorney more than $1 million in additional taxes and fines. Fielding was a few minutes late heading into the IRS building for his 12th straight audit. His accountant was already inside. Fielding knew that somebody must have targeted him with the IRS, but he had so many enemies to list was long, and he didn't have the time to check them all out. These IRS bozos were costing him plenty. Fielding thought as he walked toward the building. If he ever found out who ratted him out, there would be hell to pay because he was James Fielding, and nobody messed with him. He was inside his own head pretty good and wasn't paying complete attention to his surroundings when a man wearing a baseball hat and dark sunglasses reached out with his left hand as he and Fielding passed each other. Fielding crumpled to the ground a split second after he felt the pain in his testicles. He had barely heard the crackle of the stun gun. One quick kick landed on his nose, breaking it. Another one landed on the side of his jaw. His head snapping back before he could even feel the pain, another landed on the front of his face. The assailant then maneuvered near his legs. Fielding could see him raise his knee, and before he could move, it came down. Sharp pain streamed throughout his body, sending him into a dark black world. Robbie grinned as he put the weapon back in his hoodie pocket, took out 3 teeth that had lodged in his shoe, and kept walking. ### Story 2, The Island of Betrayal. I walked along the embankment on a weekend after meeting a friend, contemplating what gift to give my wife for the anniversary of our life together. We'd been legally married for 20 years, and before that, we had a couple of years to get used to each other and get to know one another. We didn't have children, but we dedicated our lives to each other, so they'll love many things, but this time I wanted to come up with something special. My friend Stan and I exchanged a few ideas, but none seemed quite fitting. As I walked along the sidewalk, I glanced at the billboards that seemed to be everywhere, and that's when I noticed an advertisement for a travel agency. It was a new one I hadn't heard of before. Below was a brief description mentioning their reasonable prices and a huge selection of options. I saved their number in my phone, found a convenient spot, and dialed. A pleasant-voiced lady answered and started listing their services, but it felt somewhat monotonous and dull, so I arranged a meeting with her instead. In less than an hour, I took a taxi to a huge building where their office was located on the third floor. There I was given numerous brochures and magazines detailing various vacation options with thorough descriptions and pictures. I settled on a short cruise to one of the islands along the coast. It seemed intriguing since they had designated areas where visitors could imagine themselves on a deserted island. But what appealed to me the most was the lack of complete connectivity there, no mobile or internet signal. My wife was obsessed with spending time on social media and various websites. I wanted her to experience a complete break and rediscover the zest for life we had before the influx of gadgets. Approaching the consultant, I inquired about how to communicate with the mainland in case of emergencies. She explained that there was a communication tower on the island and personnel who handled such situations, along with a medical station providing first aid in severe cases. They'd arrange a helicopter transfer. This option seemed intriguing and engaging, and the price the consultant quoted was reasonable. After booking the trip for my wife and me, I happily headed home but didn't tell of the surprise that now awaited Samantha. "How was your walk?" she asked when I got home, noticing my satisfied look. "Just met a friend. He told me some interesting stuff, but nothing out of the ordinary." "And what were you up to?" "I'm starving," I replied. "Everything's ready. Just need to reheat. Can you wait 10 minutes? Samantha answered. I nodded and went to the living room, thinking of catching up on some news on TV. But before that, I wanted to change and freshen up, as it had been a hot day. As I entered the bedroom looking for a clean shirt, I noticed my wife's laptop open. It seemed she had been messaging someone. Later, when I returned to the living room, my wife called me for lunch. As I suspected, she had simply reheated some dumplings she'd boiled for breakfast. I stayed quiet, offering a strange smile for her efforts. During lunch, I thought about Stan. We'd been close friends for many years, but unlike me, he was still unmarried, occasionally having flings with beautiful girls. At that moment, he was alone, and I decided to propose that he join me on the vacation I'd planned. Stan was initially surprised but liked the idea and agreed. A week later, I solemnly revealed the planned gift to my wife. Samantha was pleasantly excited and didn't oppose the trip. The only thing I omitted was the absence of communication on the island because then she would have preferred to spend that time at home with her laptop. I didn't tell her or my friend about it to not spoil the surprise. Soon, the three of us were flying on a small plane to the coast, and from there, a huge boat took us to our destination. Even before docking, we could admire the beautiful scenery. Samantha decided to take a few selfies and immediately upload them to social media. At that moment, she noticed a lack of internet or cell service. She approached me initially, assuming something was wrong with her phone. "Oh darling, didn't I tell you there's no connection here?" I replied with a slightly surprised look. "You told me no. You didn't say anything to me about this, and you know how important it is for me," she replied angrily. Then she went to check Stan's phone, hoping it might catch a signal, but he disappointed her too, and so did the rest of the passengers. Some mentioned it was intentionally designed this way. After that, Samantha didn't talk to me for a while, but she usually didn't stay upset for long, and I knew it would pass soon. While we were taking to different parts of the island, I gazed at the transparent water in the shore. Meanwhile, my wife, leaning against the railing, didn't stop trying to catch even a single bar of signal. A bungalow made entirely from palm branches and trunks was not far from the shore, yet surrounded by local flora. Our little home was designed for two, while Stan's bungalow was 2 kilometers away from ours. Initially, he found it inconvenient, questioning why we came together if we had to travel such a distance just to visit each other. However, he soon got used to it and even enjoyed it. We spent 2 days exploring the seas, discovering the truly wild nature of the place. There wasn't even a refrigerator in the bungalow, just a shelf for local fruits, a few canned goods, and of course, some luxury for tourists, a small amount of alcohol. Additionally, we were given primitive fishing rods to try catching fish ourselves. Sitting by the fire on the shore in the evening when Stan came over again, we roasted a small fish on branches and discussed what we liked or didn't like about this place. Samantha was the first to speak, expressing how much she missed her previous life and how her fingers were itching to scroll through the news feed. Stan, on the other hand, seemed to like everything. Later, I invited him to walk with me to find more dry branches for the fire. He was not against it, especially since he needed to answer nature's call. I led him into an area where no path was trodden. When he asked why we were going so far, I mentioned I wanted to show him something interesting. He got interested and followed me like an obedient puppy. We seemed to have entered the densest part of the vegetation, but then we stumbled upon a small clearing only a few meters wide. However, it didn't bother me. I brought my friend to a pile of branches and asked him to help me move them. Under the branches was a rather old hatch covered in moss and rust. It seemed untouched since World War II when I found it initially. I struggled to lift the lid, but through a narrow gap shining a flashlight, I realized there was an underground bunker. And now I brought my friend to help me fully open the lid and examine what was inside. As we descended the dark stairs, occasionally brushing off dense cobwebs, we found a small empty room with another iron door. Initially, I assumed it might have a complex lock making it inaccessible. However, the door wasn't difficult to lock. It only required turning a huge valve. The next room turned out to be a small bunker with several closets and old spring beds. Stan enthusiastically started examining everything using his flashlight. Then he found a kerosene lamp and, after lighting it, the room became much brighter. "Dude, this is incredible," he exclaimed excitedly. "It's a real bunker. I don't think they made this for us on purpose," he continued. When he saw the expiration date on one of the canned goods had long passed, "Yeah, I think so too," I said, approaching him from behind. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." Stan turned to face me, not understanding what I meant. But at that moment, I struck him with an iron rod that lay on one of the shelves. Stan collapsed onto the concrete floor, and I looked at him with disgust before leaving and closing the door. I wedged the rod into the wheel so Stan couldn't open the door from the inside. When I returned to the shore, Samantha was lying on the sand, lost in thoughts. Noticing I came back alone, she asked where Stan went. "He decided to go back to his place," I replied, scratching my arm. "He said he was tired and wanted some time alone." "That's strange," she said. "We were supposed to chat more, and where's the firewood? Were you going to get some?" I realized that I missed that moment here and needed to fix the situation. "It's dark there. I didn't find anything." "You know what, let's go rest already and tomorrow during the day I'll prepare everything for the bonfire," I said to my wife, extending my hand. Samantha was about to reach out her hand when she suddenly jerked it back. "Anthony, my goodness, what is this?" She even grimaced a bit. I looked at my hand and saw that it was covered in a small rash. Now I understood why my hand was itching so much. "Probably touched some poison ivy," I answered innocently and withdrew my hand. The next entire day, my wife and I were alone. I behaved quite casually, as if nothing had happened, trying to entertain myself as best I could. However, Samantha persisted in asking me why Stan hadn't come by, and she even planned to go to his bungalow to find out what was going on. But I knew he wasn't there, and I started making up various excuses to dissuade Samantha from going there. For a while, she calmed down, but at night I woke up wanting to use the bathroom and found that Samantha wasn't in the cabin. I wandered outside for a bit and waited for about half an hour. Then I realized that she had indeed decided to carry out her plan. Armed with a flashlight, I headed to Stan's bungalow. As suspected, Samantha was there. She was sitting on a small makeshift bed of branches, even turning off her flashlight. I sat down next to her and asked what she was doing there. I've checked everything here. The fruit scraps have already started to rot. It seems he hasn't been here for a while. Anthony, what if something happened to him? She looked at me. Why are you suddenly so concerned about him? Before, you only cared about things like the length of your nails and your photos on social media, but he's our friend. I feel like something happened to him. Oh, you feel that? I asked, disappointed. And how long have you been feeling this way about him? Samantha looked at me as if I was speaking nonsense. However, I was fully aware of what I was saying and grabbing her by the hand. I looked at her with an angry gaze. What did you think I wouldn't find out, damn? I saw your messages, the words you write to him, sending him your nude photos. Samantha realized what I meant and was horrified. Only now did I admit that I knew her secret of cheating on me. I hit her several times in the face because I could no longer contain my anger. I had kept everything inside for so long. I found out about her infidelity on the day I bought the vacation packages, seeing that she had left a page open. I couldn't resist and looked into it. When I saw Stan's name in one of the chats, curiosity completely took over me, and I opened their correspondence. Words cannot express the disappointment I felt then. I was instantly filled with rage and wanted to create a scene right away, then deal with both of them. However, another thought occurred to me, and I decided to settle the score with the traitors in a more twisted way. That's why I invited Stan to come with us. I knew he wouldn't resist such an offer, and now that we were here, I had the opportunity to deal with them in a way that no one would suspect me of committing a crime. All that time, I kept my anger inside, and it grew with immense force in the last few days. I could barely contain myself, but the wait was worth it. Stan was now sitting locked in a bunker that hardly anyone realized, judging by his condition. Samantha was completely in my hands without the possibility of calling for help because apart from the non-working phone, there was no one around for many miles. I hit Samantha again with such force that she lost consciousness. Then I lifted her over my shoulder and headed to our cabin, where I sat her in a corner securely tied with ropes and just in case gagged her with a piece of cloth. She woke up about half an hour later. I was sitting sharpening the sharp end of a stick, turning it into a primitive spear. Samantha began to grunt, and I removed the gag from her mouth. "Idiot, what are you planning?" she asked angrily. "What am I planning? What do you think you're planning? You jumped into bed with my friend, trampled our marriage, our relationship, and now you're asking me what I'm planning?" Samantha fell silent for a few minutes, realizing that I wouldn't let her go easily now and suspecting that I had done something to Stan as well. I squatted closer to her and placed a knife's edge against her cheek. "Anthony, what do you want? Please," she started pleading. I saw fear in her eyes, and she was on the verge of tears, but I couldn't care less. In fact, I enjoyed that she was now feeling pain too. "Oh, now you're begging," I hissed. "You should have thought about it before you slept with that bastard. You know, at first I thought I'd just feed both of you to the sharks, but now I have a different plan for you. I want both you and him to feel what I'm feeling. You treacherous bastards. I trusted you. You were the closest people to me, and this is how you decide to treat me." I pressed the blade harder, leaving a small cut on her cheek. Samantha stared at me in horror, and I relished in the sight, but this was only the beginning. I knew I was being too cruel to them like a deranged maniac, but it was because during my time in the army when I was sent off to war, something unpleasant happened to me there, and I got a little concussed. Even though they treated me later, there was still some residual effect. I became too emotional, and since then, any unpleasantness involving me or my family hit me hard. Samantha knew about this and should have guessed how deeply her betrayal would affect me, but maybe she hoped I wouldn't find out. However, I already knew and now she would have to deal with the consequences. I put the blindfold back over my wife's mouth and returned to the bed of twigs. She continued to cry, her hands twitching every now and then, hoping to free herself from the ropes, but I paid no attention. I had 5 more days of vacation ahead of me, and I was determined to torture the traitors. I had different thoughts in my head, but the result was the same every time. When the spear was ready, I threw it aside and again went to my wife, took her by the arm though she resisted, and leaped her out of the cabin. I was going to take her to the same bunker where Stan was at the moment. I even wondered what was wrong with him now since I hadn't gone back there until now. Samantha stumbled and fell a few times on the way, and it was starting to piss me off. She was mulling something through a rag, and I kept dragging her. Eventually, I got tired of it and stopped and slapped her again. What are you trying to do? No one can help you here. Dreaming of a lover? Well, you'll meet him soon enough, I said, but Samantha started mowing even more, so I took the gag off to see what she wanted. You bastard, you sick bastard. I won't forgive you for this. You're going to pay. You hear me, she said angrily. Samantha wasn't crying anymore, only angry, but she could only be angry at herself now because it was her own fault that it had come to this. I was only doing what my wounded heart told me to do. I took a step toward her and grabbed the rag to cover her mouth again, but she interrupted me. Wait, I have to go to the bathroom, she said in a calmer voice. I realized it was probably a ploy to try to escape, but I didn't enjoy being around a shitty woman either. I replied that she could do her business right there on the spot. Samantha, however, expressed her displeasure that she wasn't comfortable doing it that way. Was Fing someone else comfortable for you? Sit down or you can do it on the fly. Samantha stopped talking and extended one elbow with her hands tied behind her back. I realized what she wanted and with a few movements tied her arms in front so she could do what she needed to do more comfortably. She sat down on the grass, lifting her sundress, but continued to look at me reproachfully. I myself guessed that it would be somewhat disgusting to look at all this and turn my head away, but a few seconds after I turned away, I heard the rustling of leaves where Samantha had crouched. Sensed something was wrong and turned back. She decided to take advantage of the moment though and picked up the rock she'd already swung at me. It was only my old skill that helped me to dodge in time so that she didn't break my head and knock me out, but still, she hit me, and while I was recuperating, Samantha caught on and immediately ran. But no matter how hard she tried, she was only inexperienced for such occasions and a woman spoiled by modern delights. I chased after her and quickly caught up with her, knocking her to the ground. She tried to wrestle with me, but she had little success as I was stronger after all. Samantha's behavior made me very angry, and I hit her in the face several times again, only this time I didn't hit her like a woman. I hit her like a real opponent. Very soon, her face was swollen on one side and covered with blood. Then I dragged her across the grass to where I had left another traitor. While Samantha lay on the ground moaning, I lifted the lid which opened much more easily and pushed my wife down into it. Then climbing down myself, I checked the second door. The iron bar was still in place, so Stan hadn't gotten out. Leaning my ear against the door, I listened. It was very quiet behind the door. Realizing that Samantha wouldn't fight back, I started to unlock the door to find out why it was so quiet, assuming that Stan had either suffocated or had been killed by the blow to his head. But when I opened the door and shined my flashlight in, I found that no one was inside. I was a little confused, trying to figure out where Stan might have gone. Was there some kind of emergency exit, and had he managed to escape? But while I was thinking about that, Stan, who was hiding behind the door, crept up and hit me just as I had hit him. But his blow wasn't as hard, and I stayed conscious, though my eyes began to blur a little, and I used all my former skills again. Realizing that I had to fight this scoundrel, I wasn't as young as I was then. The years had taken their toll, but I pulled myself together and started swinging my fists, hitting Stan in the torso and then in the head. But he wasn't weak either, and he fought back with all his might. I had even momentarily forgotten about Samantha, who remained lying behind the door. Only when Stan hit me so hard that I fell to the floor by the threshold did I notice her getting up, ready to join her lover. So she didn't realize her guilt, and now she's completely betrayed me. This stirred even more rage in me. I gathered all my strength, got up, and with a scream lunged at Stan, knocking him to the ground. I mercilessly pounded his face with my fists. It didn't take long to beat him this time, and soon enough, he was out again. When I finished with him, I turned to my wife who stood there horrified by what was happening, seeing me in such fury. She didn't dare do anything against me. Stan was still alive, albeit unconscious. I led my wife into the same room and pushed her onto the creaky bed. Then I began rummaging through the cabinets, unsure of what I was looking for. There was a lot of miscellaneous junk on the shelves that might have been useful years ago, but now much of it was useless due to years of neglect and dampness. However, I found a few pieces of old chains. I didn't know why they were there, but they served me well as I tied both scoundrels to a thick pipe running along the wall. Having secured them like this, I no longer worried they would try to escape or come up with something else. Closing the door, I left them there in complete darkness without water or food. Then I returned to the shore, needing to clean my wounds and get some rest. For hours, I sat by the shore, consumed by dark thoughts. I remembered discovering the betrayal, devising a plan for revenge, locking them in the concrete room. For a moment, I realized that my jealousy had completely taken over me, and I had simply lost my mind because at that moment, I was acting like a heartless tyrant. But was it my fault? Weren't they treacherous to me first? Continuing to converse silently with myself, I realized that inside me two feelings were battling, love and hatred. Some were deep in my soul. I still loved Samantha as we had spent so many years together, and Stan had been a friend for many years too. However, they had decided to destroy everything, and now I couldn't feel towards them what I used to. And for a moment, I wanted to leave everything as it was and never return to that place. Nevertheless, I wasn't a heartless beast. I took water, some food, and went to visit my captives. Moreover, I wanted to talk to them to understand what pushed them to betrayal. Opening the door, I lit a kerosene lamp and examined these beaten unfortunate individuals. Samantha sat there just staring at me, and Stan tried to lunge at me, but the chain held him back. I sat on a chair near them and just watched for a while. "Anthony, what are you trying to achieve?" Stan began. "Do you think by keeping us here you can change what has already happened? Have you not considered that they will search for us? They will find us for sure. You won't be able to do anything more. You'll be imprisoned." "Oh, so now all you can do is talk even with a broken jaw," I retorted. "Why are you so sure they'll find you? The people who built this resort didn't find the bunker, and they won't find it now." When I said these words, Samantha was even more horrified, fear enveloping her body and mind, realizing she might die here. But I sent it to scare them even more. After long contemplation, I realized I wouldn't be happy like before anyway and intended to teach them a lesson. Then I would agree to anything, even imprisonment. "I didn't come here just to idle chatter with you both," I continued. "I came to find out why you both did this to me. What did I do that made you betray me? I trusted you. You were dear to me. Stan, we've been through so much together, and you, Samantha, I gave you everything. I had emotions, money, everything. What was lacking for you?" I fell silent, expecting Stan to say something in response, but he fell into thought, as did I, while Samantha sadly lowered her eyes. However, after a short pause, Stan spoke up. "You're right. We're to blame for this, but we simply love each other," he began. "Personally, I've realized this for a while, but I kept silent about my feelings because you're also my friend. Recently though, I realized I couldn't hold back anymore. It's beyond me. Beyond both of us, and Samantha loves me too. We wanted to tell you, love you," say I cut him off. "What kind of love is it that you're stabbing knives in the back?" Stan didn't reply. I took provisions and a first aid kit from my bag which we brought along and tossed them like dogs. Both of them pounced on the water and food like jackals. It even seemed like they were ready to attack each other for a gulp of water. Leaving them alone again, I locked the door and returned to the shore. I visited them for a couple more days, bringing them food each time. Meanwhile, I pondered what to do next. I wasn't particularly keen on going to prison. I thought I'd leave them there and come on with something later once I got to the mainland. I'd anonymously report their location and then disappear somewhere no one could find me. That evening, when I decided to proceed in that manner with a clear conscience, I prepared for sleep. However, I soon felt a significant drop in temperature followed by rain. It grew stronger and soon became a hurricane. I hadn't expected such weather. Statistically, this island never faced bad weather, but now my concern was finding shelter. The bungalow I lived in started to crumble from the gusts of wind. Within minutes, a piece of the roof flew off, and the downpour soaked me completely. The place was no longer suitable for shelter. I thought it best to return to the bunker, but it wasn't that close. I wandered among trees, trying to spot a path, but soon realized I was lost. However, I couldn't stop and had to continue. Miraculously, I stumbled upon a small cave and sought refuge there to weather the storm that raged all night. When I woke up, the sun was already high. Looking around, I hoped the previous night had been just a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't so. Several branches had fallen against the cave entrance, and I had to exert effort to remove them. When I emerged, I couldn't believe my eyes. The beautiful leafy island from yesterday now resembled an apocalypse zone. Many trees were uprooted, mud mixed with grass and leaves, and everything around was in shades of gray. However, sitting put wasn't an option. I set out to find our shore and then check on Samantha and Stan. I didn't roam for long, but the journey was tough. I kept slipping in the mud and falling into small depressions hidden under branches. I began to think it was punishment for what I had done to my wife and friend. But when I arrived, I realized it was just my conscience urging me to find them and set them free, and I was ready to do just that. However, the place where the bunker entrance was recently located was now covered in a layer of mud that had slid from the neighboring mountain. Realizing I couldn't save them myself, all I could do was wait. And I didn't have to wait long. After the hurricane, the resort management ordered the evacuation of the island's visitors and provided necessary aid. When I reached the shore, I saw a boat and people in uniforms already searching the area where the bungalow was. I shouted from a distance, asking them to take me, feeling my strength dwindling naturally. I didn't tell them the truth about what I did to my wife and friend when they questioned me. I recounted the story I'd concocted earlier, claiming they went swimming in the sea when the sudden storm hit, and I never saw them again. However, I kept the word I had given myself. When I returned home, I went almost immediately to an internet cafe, made up an original letter in which I indicated where the Vic could be found, even found a place on the map, and marked it with a cross. And sent it all to the appropriate address anonymously. At the same time, I quickly sold the house, lowering the price, and moved to Canada for my own safety. I waited for Samantha and Stan to be found and they could easily proclaim me the culprit of their unpleasant adventure. But no matter how much I watched the news, there was still no news about them. It was only months later that I read on the internet that the bunker had been found and dug up, but the rescuers only found 2 bodies. When I left, I felt a certain calmness in my soul. Maybe it was because I had avenged their betrayal, or maybe I just wanted to forgive them already. But since then, I buried all my feelings, both love and hate, deep in my soul like in that concrete bunker and made a promise to myself that I would not let anyone else so close to my heart.